In this episode, we chat with Peter Baugh about NHL Outdoors at Lake Tahoe. We discuss Injured Sabres as well as when Eichel could ask for a trade from the struggling franchise with Anthony Sciandra. Hit the music. Welcome to Jablam Sports Hockey, folks. I'm your host, Peter Baugh, and the mic is always on. You can find me on Twitter at Russia98. You can find the full show at Jablam Sports. If you have any questions or comments, please tweet us. Use the hashtag Jablam Sports. That's JABLAM Sports. Please subscribe to us if you haven't done so yet, and click on the three dots in your podcasting app. Share our show with three hockey fans you know. Thank you, everyone. Remember, check out our website, go to jablamsports.com, see all our podcasts, and even game notes for each episode. You'll get links to all the things we mentioned on the show, including guests. For our podcasts, click on podcasts, and then hockey on this show specifically right on our website. Time for some trending now. Now to discuss all things beautiful and delayed is Peter Baugh. He covers the Avalanche for The Athletic. You can find him on Twitter at Peter_Baugh. Peter 2.0, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Peter.
All right, before we get into how awesome the setting was, how the game went, and how beautiful the sun glistened off the ice. Wait a minute. The sun was a bit of a problem here. During the first period of the game between the Colorado Avalanche and the Vegas Golden Knights, players and, of course, the referees were stumbling and falling over it. The giant star shown on the ice made the frozen water unskateable. NBC's broadcast had Mike Tirico interview NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman, and he stated, "We didn't think it was appropriate to play the game at this time." That was, again, after the first period during the intermission. And with the sun not having any clouds. And, of course, we're going to be posting this on our Season 6, Episode 11. Your three great articles posted. They will be posted in our game notes. I believe you had in one of them, Charlene, a Reno resident. She quoted saying, "Tahoe is sunny a lot. I feel like they should have seen this coming. But the sun is pretty intense here." So that's my issue with this. Did they not do the proper due diligence, knowing the sun has always kind of been this way at Lake Tahoe?
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think that multiple things can be true. It can be true that the NHL wanted to do something unique and special, and they were able to put a rink in a really beautiful location and put on a game that could have been really cool. And it's also true that maybe they should have foreseen the sun circumstances. I know that it was something that they certainly thought about and were aware of, because they made contingency plans for how to finish the games if the conditions weren't playable enough. So it's not like they didn't know that this was a possibility. I think they were hoping for more cloud cover in February. But we also have to keep in mind that usually these outdoor games take about a year to prepare. They organized this outdoor game in two months. So they first visited the site at Lake Tahoe in like December 15th and 16th. They visited a few other sites. I reported that Lake Louise was one of the sites they were looking at. And just some government regulations in Canada didn't allow that to happen. So I think it's one of those things that it happened quickly. They wanted to have a scenic game. They were able to have a really beautiful location. And maybe they overlooked the sun a bit, and that obviously posed issues.
You mentioned Lake Louise, and I think they still thought the festivities overall was successful. Where could you see them going in the future? Are there rumors about them going somewhere else?
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. It didn't sound like Bettman was super enthused about doing another event without fans, because they do like having fans at these events. I mean, that's kind of the point of doing outdoor games, is fit more people in a bigger venue than you could in a normal arena and have a really unique atmosphere. This year, obviously with the virus, it was a different situation, and they were kind of forced to get creative, which is what happened. And so I don't know. I'm curious if they would try and do another scenic location, or if they would maybe want to go back to kind of having it in stadiums, or maybe they do a few outdoor games a year, one of which is at a scenic location, one of which is elsewhere. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I thought it looked great. I would love to see another game at some sort of scenic venue. I don't know what they'll choose to do, but I think it would be cool if they wanted to do it again.
I'm glad you mentioned that, again, there's no fans there. And I remember when they first said that they were going to do it, I think it was Bellemare who came out and said, "Oh, I can't wait to play. We're going to be playing on the ice." And that was my feeling too. I was like, oh, they're going to be playing on the lake. And of course, obviously, that would totally be not appropriate with the sun being that strong and the ice actually being pretty open for the kayakers and everybody attending. But I was in the same boat. I'm like, oh my God, they're going to play on the ice. It's going to be so fun. I can't wait till they miss the net and the puck will just slide so far away. Somebody's going to be like, you got to go get it. You missed the net.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, Tahoe doesn't freeze actually. So it never would have worked. It's just too big. But yeah, when I first heard it too, I was like, oh wow, are they going to be playing on the lake? That's awesome. But yes, it is very good that they did not try and play on the lake, because that's impossible.
It was beautiful. The serene backdrop and the visuals made by the NHL and the NBC broadcast were just gorgeous. And they had the cool structures with the very cottage feel. And I think you even wrote along the rink, the NHL had vendors build makeshift locker rooms for the players and erected chalet-like buildings for the team and officials. So it was pretty cool. But they didn't construct traditional press boxes. So for media members like yourself, they had shifts in terms of watching the game when they could watch it.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. So obviously with the virus, it makes things different in terms of spacing. You can't have people too close together for too long a period of time. And you also, they wanted to make sure, they were very careful about making sure we were always out of TV shots. They did not want us interrupting their broadcast, which I suppose makes sense. So the way they had it was, there was kind of a media platform almost behind the ice, behind the Avalanche goal in the first period. And it was maybe 15 feet behind the ice, and you could see like a decent amount of the action. You could track the puck a little bit. I mean, I frankly I didn't necessarily notice the slipping as much as some people did, like all the falls like that people were having. But you still had a view of the action and could tell in general what was going on. And so when it was not your turn up there, you were either kind of farther back where they dropped you off, where you could see, I guess, the tops of people's heads and kind of get a sense of what was happening. Like, the Avs scored when I was back there, and you could tell that they scored because you could hear the horn go off. You could see the players kind of crowding around to celebrate. You could see that it was on Fleury, but you didn't have a great view. And then they actually had a bus that you were kind of like, when your shift was done, they would take you back to the media workroom where they had a TV set up. But then actually during the 8-hour delay, they were like, yeah, if you've already seen this, we're only going to have a short viewing period at night, and only the people who haven't gotten a chance to see it can go back there. So I was only there for one little stretch.
It was funny because I really liked the one piece that you had about what people didn't see on TV, and that was pretty cool. And again, we're going to be posting that on our game notes for this episode on our website, splamsports.com. And you mentioned that you couldn't visually see the game very well from certain angles, and the people in attendance, they couldn't see it very well either. I guess maybe they didn't expect that many media members or people in attendance in kayaks and stuff appearing. Would have been better if they had a big, huge jumbotron for at least the fans' experience.
Well, I mean, frankly, I don't think they were particularly, and this is fair, they weren't particularly concerned about what kayakers could see. This was an event that in a lot of ways was made for TV, and they really wanted it to feel like a rink was dropped in the middle of the woods in this beautiful scenery. And one way to interrupt the feel of a rink dropped in the middle of the woods is to have a giant jumbotron. So I think that was kind of one of the things. And I think that there were, I mean, obviously I would have preferred to have I guess, a little more chance to see the game. But like, I mean, I think that they obviously had spatial restrictions, and a good amount of media members wanted to come, and that leads to maybe some tough decisions of how you're going to handle things. So I think that was kind of how it went. I don't necessarily think. I think with the pandemic, there's kind of got to be a lot of grace with how you view how things are handled in a lot of ways, because I think it's just, these are unprecedented circumstances. And I mean, I'm sure they could have fit more people on the viewing platform if it wasn't a pandemic and they weren't trying to keep everyone spaced out.
What did the league do, or maybe didn't do, to make it a fun experience for those fans via kayak or boat?
Well, so the mascots went down and interacted with them a lot. And they could, I mean, I think a lot of the fans were pretty, like, they knew going out that they were going out more for the experience than to have a great view of the game. Like, I think they knew that they weren't going to be able to see very much. But a lot of them brought, like, one guy I talked to, his name was Matt, brought his phone and just was watching on TV. He, like, had a stream of the game on his phone, so he kind of could follow the action that way. While also seeing the tops of people's heads up there. And then another woman I talked to had earbuds in, and she had a radio stream up so she could kind of follow along. So there were different ways that people found to kind of follow along. I'm curious if the game it would have been fun. I think it's possible if the game hadn't been delayed that they might have done something where, like, they threw pucks into the lake or something. The league, I didn't mention any plans of that, but I could have seen them doing something fun like that. It was just obviously tough because the game was delayed 8 hours. So when it was dark, those people weren't exactly coming back in kayaks, because that wouldn't be the most safe.
So 8 hours. Avs led 1-0 after 1 with the Samuel Girard goal. And then they came back after midnight Eastern. The game concluded, and Martinez tied it up at 1 apiece in the second. So is that some kind of record, I guess, 11 hours apart or whatever it is, or I guess 8 hours within the same NHL game to have 2 separate goals?
Yeah, I don't know what the record is of, like, paused games, but I definitely got a big kick out of, and I tweeted this at the time, that the Avs were on a 5-on-3 at the end of the first period. So I tweeted out, the Avs had 8 hours and still couldn't manage to score on a 5-on-3. And people thought that was kind of funny. And it was definitely, like, kind of an anomaly. And yeah, just a weird situation. Mikko Rantanen, who's one of the Avs best players, described it as the weirdest day of hockey he's ever experienced. And I think that's probably just about right. But I think in the end, it was also a pretty fun day probably more so for Colorado because the Avalanche won. But I think that, like, Alex Tuch, I saw an interview where he talked about how cool it was having the people in kayaks out there, and he enjoyed that. And I think the Avalanche, certainly all the players I talked to, really appreciated the experience, even if it was a little bit weird. So I think that if there were complaints about the way the game was handled, it was maybe more from, and I'm sure the players were frustrated with the ice conditions and things like that. But I think that the players, at least on the Avalanche that I talked to, are pretty happy with the experience. They thought it was really cool. And I think it's easier to feel that way when you come away with a win.
Again, you can find him on Twitter at Peter_Baugh. Thank you for joining us, Peter.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let's go over to the border. We are team isoing this week the Buffalo Sabres. Now on the show is Anthony Sciandra. Did I say that properly, Anthony?
You did. You nailed it.
All right, great. He's the co-host of the Expected Buffalo podcast, and he's also with SB Nation Die by the Blade, the Buffalo Sabres blog, and you can find him on Twitter at DBTBANTH. So that's like basically Die by the Blade Anthony for short.
That is right.
All right. Thank you for joining me, Anthony. So I know you recently wrote about it, and that's on the Expected Buffalo podcast on your page there. Mm-hmm. And obviously with the big news is about Jake McCabe. His season started off so well, and now we know, of course, during the Devils game, and there's been a few injuries with the Devils and stuff, and they're the Devils, I guess. Damn you, Nico Hischier. And He suffered pretty bad injuries to his ACL, MCL, and meniscus, and his time of recovery is listed as 6 to 8 months, so he's gone for the year. Before we kind of get into the injury and everything, I want to talk about how well he was playing before he got injured.
Yeah, I mean, Jake McCabe was pretty unanimously, viewed as the best Sabres defenseman to start the year. In terms of the advanced stats, which, as you know, that's kind of mine and Chad's bread and butter over at Expected Buffalo. He had the lowest expected goals against rate, on the Sabres, the entire team really, but the blue line obviously as well. He was paired up with Rasmus Ristolainen, who has historically bad metrics, but he was actually helping elevate those this year. And so, yeah, there's a very strong argument to be made that he was the team's MVP prior to the injury. And, if the Norris Trophy wasn't based solely on offensive talent and how many points you rack up, and actually what you do on defense, he would be like that caliber. He was playing that well. So really, really big loss for the Sabres. And what's really unfortunate is the guy who was going to replace him, Will Borgen, who started off the season really, really well also. He's now sidelined 6 to 8 weeks with a fractured forearm or whatever that bone is in your forearm. So not great. A lot of injuries on the blue line. Ristolainen is still out on COVID protocol. So a lot of question marks defensively in Buffalo.
You touched base, and I did want to finish this interview talking Eichel, but you mentioned that you believe McCabe is the MVP of this team. Is he that much better or somehow better than Eichel in terms of being the MVP of the Sabres?
No. He's not like the long-term MVP. I'm saying like the first 14 games of the year, he was playing, he had the most positive impact value, in my opinion. I mean, he truly, truly was excellent. I mean, defensive metrics wise, you were talking Nick Chalmerson levels of defensive competency. I mean, he was playing out of his mind. I mean, and he's kind of been on this slow upward trajectory for a couple of years now where, let's say circa 2017-18, he was probably very average, like very, like he's a third pairing defenseman, right? Mm-hmm. And he's slowly kind of ramped up. And this year, man, he looked fantastic. But no, long term, I mean, obviously, Jack Eichel is far and away the most valuable player on the team.
So he could have been MVP for this season if he didn't get injured.
Correct.
Right. Speaking about those injuries, so you mentioned Borgen, he's injured. McCabe is injured. We know the struggles that Ristolainen's been having due to COVID, and he won't be back. This team is struggling even before these injuries to pick up points in this East Division to begin with. So where do they go from here? Is it time to make moves this early in the season and maybe start selling off already? Taylor Hall, Eric Stahl, what do they do?
Well, I think the trade market, whether you want to add and kind of salvage something or, sell off and just call it another tank year. I think that's tough with COVID protocols because, state to state, there's different quarantine rules and especially because you've effectively wiped out maybe, let's say, a quarter of the market in Canada because they're not going to wait, that long for a guy to come across the border. Quarantine, I think that's a 2-week turnaround before you'd even get the player after you trade for them, right? So I think this season you're going to see fewer deals aside from the deadline, which inevitably you'll have something, right? But no, just the circumstances put the Sabres in a really tough spot with all these injuries and outside of, call-ups and peeking at the waiver wire, there's not a lot of ways to address it right now. And it's the same deal in goal where they haven't had great goaltending. The last couple games have been good, but by and large, pretty below average between Linus Ullmark and Carter Hutton. And I mean, right now, just to stop the bleeding on defense, I would claim Luke Schenn. I mean, he's not a good defenseman, but you're getting to the point where the Sabres are one defensive injury away from calling up a rookie from the AHL, like a Matthias Samuelsson or Oskari Laaksonen. And you want those players playing AHL minutes, especially because the Amerks are winning and you want them to get used to winning, right? You don't want to throw them into the Sabres environment right now, but they're also not ready. And you don't want them at 19 years old getting their confidence beat down because they're getting shelled every night with a defense that's made up of half Rochester players. So I think you claim Luke Schenn. I mean, what else do? You have to stop this bleeding. You need bodies, veteran bodies. And he's the only guy with NHL experience who you can reasonably get right now that isn't a trade and you can have him pretty quickly.
We always have a special trade deadline episode and we will be possibly talking about Sabres and what moves they could make or they have made for that episode. But you spoke about not bringing up players into the fire, that is bringing them up from the Americans to the Sabres roster right now. I like some of the pieces in the future that they have, Dylan Cousins, and of course Luukkonen, who's great prospect waiting in the wings in between the pipes for the Sabres. Mm-hmm. How is he playing right now for them?
You're asking Luukkonen?
Yeah, the goaltender.
Yeah. He's playing very, very well. So I think he started half or maybe just over half the games in Rochester, and that's just because of the turnaround of their schedule, not because he's playing poorly. But he put up great numbers. Little rocky his first game, but the three that followed were 3 consecutive victories, and he looked great in all of them. And funny enough, Dustin Tokarski, his backup in Rochester, has actually played even better, which is wild. I mean, they're kind of stealing wins for the Amherst right now, and that's what you want to see from Luukkonen. You want him to be stealing, victories and playing really well for them. And another guy in the system too, another goaltender is Eric Portillo, who he's an exciting prospect too. So I think that's the one position where I feel pretty comfortable with where the Sabres are, in terms of the future. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Luukkonen, after what was maybe perceived by some as a little bit of a disappointing year last year, because he played so well at the ECHL level and he played so well, in Finland. And then he came to the Amherst and was not very good in a very short sample, right? People were nervous, like, oh no, is he not developing? And I think this has been a big, big confidence boost for him to start the year so strong. And no, I'm excited about him for sure, especially because, I think everyone's a little antsy. You've got some Sabres fans saying, get him up here now because our starting goalies are playing brutally bad.
Everybody's working from home these days, and I can hear a little bit in the background.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's great. What do you have? How many runts do you have running around there?
Amazingly, that's one. Yeah, one and one on the way. So, yeah, she's a loud one.
Good luck with that if you have
another
one coming.
Again.
No, good luck with that if you have another one coming on the way. All right. I wanted to follow up with Luukkonen. What's his timetable? Is it next season, or is it maybe the following season? Where do you think he could be brought up for the Sabres?
So I'll give you reality, and I'll give you what I would ideally like to see, right? So reality, maybe next season if they're desperate enough and they can't find a veteran starter, you know what I mean? Because I think it's pretty well known the Sabres were sniffing around this offseason. They made calls to Anaheim about John Gibson. They made calls to Phoenix or Arizona rather about Antti Raanta and probably Kemper too. So they're looking for a veteran starter, right? Which gives me the indication that they'd like to give Luukkonen a little more time at the AHL level, maybe a year, maybe an extra year, maybe an extra 2, right? So I think ideally that's the way I would go. I would not want to see him up any sooner than the 22-23 season.
22-23 season.
So a full year this year in the AHL and a full year next year, and that's as soon as I would want him up.
Before we go, I don't want to know. I don't know if I want to touch base on this, but I think I should.
Go ahead and hit it, man.
All right.
What is it?
Jack Eichel's name has always been floating around in terms of maybe he wants out of Buffalo, but I think people don't hate the Sabres. They don't hate Buffalo, but they do want to see Eichel not get wasted with his career because
I don't blame him.
He's a borderline generational talent. He's that fabulous. Mm-hmm. And maybe and I'm saying borderline generational talent. And I can see if he was paired up with an all-star playmaker or a scoring winger, you could throw his stats into oblivion.
Right.
So when does he ask for a trade, or when is it time for him to move if the Sabres continue in this direction in terms of not being able to make the playoffs?
Well, I'll say this. I can't speak to the merits of whether or not he's had conversations with the organization about a trade or anything like that. But what I will say is this. I would be very surprised if Jack Eichel formally requested a trade prior to the end of next season. And the reason I say that is that's when his no movement clause kicks in. So right now, if he had requested a trade tomorrow, the Sabres could trade him to any of the other 30 teams in the league and he couldn't object, right? So he'd be running the risk of them trading him somewhere he doesn't want to go, right? They could trade him to Winnipeg or so, Calgary. You're like, Jack Eichel's, he wants to be in the Northeast. He's a Boston kid, and maybe he wants to go to a bigger market too, like in New York, LA, whatever, but they could trade him anywhere. They trade him in Arizona, so I don't think he would be impatient enough to run that risk. Would I blame Jack Eichel for requesting a trade? Absolutely not. The Sabres they've tried sort of, but have done a really bad job of building around him and kind of, I think you've got a really weird split in the fan base where it's like they want him to be more because, they tanked a season for the possibility of him or McDavid, or the certainty of either him or McDavid, I should say. And they kind of thought he was going to be just walking here to be Jesus and just, make everything better. But he can't do it on his own, and neither can Connor McDavid. The Oilers struggle too, right? And he's even better. So, but it's got to be frustrating for a young player, never even seeing the playoffs, to this point, and being that good, being a legitimate top 5 forward in the league. And yeah, so to the point of, does he want out? I wouldn't blame him if he did, but I would be very surprised if he made a formal request before the end of next season, because it's a pretty big risk. He doesn't really get to pick his spot then.
Again, you can find him on Twitter at DBTBANTH. That's Die by the Blade Anthony. You can also check the link to his sites on our website, on our game notes for this episode, season 6, episode 11, I believe. Anthony, thank you for stopping by.
Hey, thanks for having me, Peter. I had a really good time, and hopefully the Sabres have a little bit better fortune tonight.
I want to thank our guests today. It was fun chatting with Peter about the outdoor event at Lake Tahoe. I really enjoyed the pieces he wrote for The Athletic. Remember, check out our website for links to those articles right on the episode page. Season 6, episode 11, Lake Tahoe Sun-Injured Sabres. And it will be interesting to see what the Sabres do with another hard season going on in Buffalo. Thanks, Anthony, for joining us in this episode to discuss that. Remember, if you've enjoyed anything you've heard in this episode, or don't, please tweet at me or even our guests. You can follow me on Twitter at Russia98 or the entire team at Jablam Sports. If you want, you can also contact us on our website. You can use the hashtag at Jablam Sports, Jablam Sports, that's JABLAM, and our website is jablamsports.com/contact for our contact page there. Please check out our website. Go to jablamsports.com to see all our podcasts and even game notes for each episode, including this one. And you'll get our guests' info and links to things we mentioned on this show. Please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts, including Spotify. And of course, click on the 3 dots in your podcasting app and share this episode with 3 friends you know. Please and thank you. Also, follow us on our Facebook group, Jablam Sports. Check us out, folks. Thank you, everyone. Shout out. Well, this week's shout out is to Malcolm Kelly. He's been a great teacher for my postgraduate sports journalism program. I've already learned a fair bit in the first 2 months, and I expect to keep learning over the next year or so. Thank you, good sir. And to every one of our listeners, I'm giving you a virtual hug. Stay healthy, listen, be yourself, and stay strong.